The fifth chapter is a whole chapter which is designated to tell us that between Torah and mitzvahs, there's a virtue of learning Torah even more than doing mitzvahs. There's something special about learning Torah in the context of the connection to Hashem.
I think we say that in our prayers every day.
The Talmud Torah Keneged Kol?
Yeah.
It's clear, right? Absolutely. You said it very well. It says in Fedish and Mishnah, Talmud Torah Keneged Kol, nothing supersedes learning Torah. Now let me ask you a question, because Alter Rebbe deals with it later chapters, two other chapters later, within Tanya. But if that's the case, if you were learning Torah, do you have to stop for a mitzvah like putting on tefillin, let's say? If you learn Torah the entire morning, or you're a person who is Teirasim Nasi, today to say someone's Teirasim Nasi, Teiras is only craft, Teiras is only an occupation, is very difficult. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he was the classic case of Teiras, someone who's Teirasim Nasi, his whole involvement was in Torah, his whole life was Torah. But the concept exists throughout generations as well. There's someone who learns Torah when it comes to time of putting on tefillin. Does he have to stop to put on tefillin? At least to put on tefillin? He does. Yes. But if you say the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam,
putting on tefillin is part of Torah, it's a commandment.
It's not a part of Torah. Putting on tefillin is a mitzvah. This is mitzvah and this is learning Torah. And the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam means learning Torah overrides or supersedes, is way superior over every mitzvah. So why do you have to stop to put on tefillin?
It's an obligation.
What?
It's an obligation.
Yep. The obligation from what? Because of Hashem. And Hashem dictates in the Torah, the put on tefillin dictates in the Torah, the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. So the truth of the matter is, I'm asking it like this. It's a good question. It's not, I'm not asking this question. The Gemara asks this question. If Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, why do we have to stop for a mitzvah? And the Gemara answers. Alter Rebbe has a very beautiful explanation in chapter 23, 37. That in the end of the day, we have to stop from doing mitzvahs. Not all mitzvahs, by the way. The Gemara says mitzvah which could be done through another person, we do not have to stop. If you know charity will be given from your money, and it's not a matter of facing or standing face to face for the recipient. We know in tzedakah it's not only the actual charity which you give, it's appeasing the person and so on. But let's say none of that exists. There's somebody, a taxi driver or some courier is coming to pick up a check, for example, for a meisid, and the check is on the ledge of the home, right? And you're sitting and learning Gemara. You're not supposed to stop learning Gemara to go to, because someone else can do it. You could send someone. Could you give him that? Could you give that driver the check? You're not allowed to stop him playing, because the tzedakah will be, the mitzvah tzedakah will be fulfilled. It would be implemented without your stopping to learn.
What if you don't have that envelope on the counter?
Oh,
it surprises you.
Then it's a different story.
Yeah.
But let's look at like that. That, for example, in comparison to putting on tefillin, I can't just start learning and say, could the tefillin go on? No, you have to stop, literally stop for a moment. Physically, you have to stop to put on tefillin. I'm giving an example that tefillin doesn't work. You have to really stop to put on tefillin. You have to make the bracha and you have to stop learning Torah. You can't learn Torah and put on tefillin in the same time. But to take the 3 minutes or the 2 minutes to get up from learning Gemara when someone else can pass the check to the driver, you're not allowed to stop learning Torah if you're in the middle of learning, because the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, because the mitzvah will be done without your involvement. As opposed to mitzvahs which cannot be done without your stopping, you must stop. And Alter Rebbe explains that because ultimately the Eibishter created the world for the purpose of have a dira b'tachteinim, in other words, to have this physical world be a dwelling place for him. And Limud Torah ultimately does not accomplish that mandate. In other words, that doesn't accomplish that fulfillment of that mandate, because learning Torah, as much as we learn Torah with our speech, with our thought, but not with our action. And Hashem wants the transformation of the world of action, or the physical world via our action, and that should also become godly. So we have to take the step ahead and also get involved in the mitzvah. And we have to, if it cannot be done through someone else, we have to stop learning Torah. But again, Alter Rebbe explains it in length. But if you just, what Alter Rebbe is explaining indeed in this Perek is, so again, when a mitzvah cannot be done through others, we have to stop based on this. Like I say, there's a beautiful mishalim, or even within Torah, to explain what is this dira b'tachteinim, in other words, making a dwelling place for Hashem, Okay, in the overall, this is what it is. We deal with the physical because that's the point where we initially came down to this world for. So we have to stop learning Torah. But again, we'll learn it when the chapters we deal with this question and the explanation of Al Rebbe. What the Gemara says that a mitzvah cannot be done through others, we have to stop. But in this case, in this very perek, in this very chapter, without dealing with that Gemara, if we have to stop for this mitzvah, that mitzvah, just looking at the two mitzvahs and Torah. Mitzvahs and Torah, they're both have in common that Hashem placed Himself in both. Yet, there's a virtue of learning Torah over Kiyum mitzvahs based on the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, which is this is the halacha. But what is the meaning of why? And what's the explanation why the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam? In other words, in the union with Hashem, here we just said when a person does mitzvah, he's completely encompassed, completely surrounded with the reality of Hashem, with the essence of Hashem. And apparently when someone learns Torah, the same thing is transpiring, the same thing is happening. So why is the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam? What's the virtue of learning Torah over mitzvahs? So here the Alter Rebbe is going to explain in this chapter what is the advantage of learning Torah over mitzvahs. Therefore, if you think about it, based on this chapter, in the whole of reality, from Gan Eden to Elam Haba, there doesn't exist a union with Hashem greater than learning Torah. It doesn't matter what part of Torah. It's a Medrash, a Mishnah, a Gemara. There's nothing greater, there's no greater union with God. And what part of God, the essence of God, more than learning Torah, even more than mitzvahs. Because greater than Gan Eden, for sure we said Torah mitzvahs, both of them are greater than Gan Eden, like we said. Because Torah mitzvahs, hi, how are you? Torah mitzvahs are because Torah mitzvahs are, it's the etzem of the Shekhinah, the Hashem Himself. Why in Gan Eden it's just the ray of the Shekhinah, it's just the ray of Hashem. But so that has that Torah mitzvahs both have in common, and that's we learned last week. That's a given. So between any connection of any malach, any neshama, any level in the heavens above, nobody connects with Hashem more than the yidula, which is putting on tefillin, or does this mitzvah, or the lulav and Esther, getting matzah, or learns Torah. That's a given. That's what we had last week, because this he connects to the essence of Hashem. This week we're learning that between Torah and mitzvahs there's advantage learning Torah in what? In the union, in becoming one with Hashem. And I'll just explain why. Basically, I'll just say it orally a little, just to get the flow. The flow, what Al Rebbe is basically saying is as follows. When a person does, we said the whole time that Hashem, when a person does mitzvah, the whole entire neshama is involved in it, or the whole being of the person is encompassed with Hashem, because a person, Hashem hugs him. Literally, like someone embraces somebody, so the person who is embracing is surrounding the person who's being embraced. When a person does the mitzvah, Hashem hugs him, he hugs Hashem. But the lashon of the pasuk is that Hashem's tsuri echsebei, Hashem's shield, he's covered, he's surrounded, comforted by Hashem's shield. So what's happening is that Hashem is encompassing him, Hashem is surrounding him. When a person learns Torah, there's two things happening. The Hashem, the energy of the essence of God, is surrounding the person, and simultaneously the person is surrounding, embracing Hashem, which means Hashem goes within and Hashem is without. That's such a union. Al Rebbe said, expressions of it physically, physically it cannot be. That there should be a union between two objects, that it should be surrounded and surrounding in the same time. It's impossible. It's impossible. If I'm going to put the keys inside here, so this is surrounding the keys. If I have a bunch of keys, true, I could surround this wallet, right, or this pouch, right? But it cannot happen at the same time. Or the keys are going to surround it, or it's going to surround the keys. It cannot be simultaneous. Someone asked me the other day, what if you put a cup of water in a barrel? The water is surrounding the cup, and the cup is surrounding the water. But it's not a question. Because the water which is surrounding the cup is not the same water which the cup is surrounding. There's the outer water and the inner water. In other words, if you looked at the water itself, the outer water is just surrounding the cup. And the cup is just surrounding a different set of water. This is the cup with the water which is in the cup. It's not surrounding the same cup. The cup is not surrounding the same water which is surrounding it. Right? To the exclusion, and Alter Rebbe says, Begashmis physically doesn't exist. To the exclusion of Limdat Torah. When a person learns Torah, the energy of Hashem is surrounding the neshama, is encompassing the neshama, is embracing the neshama. In the same token, in the same time, simultaneously, the neshama is surrounding, is encompassing the same energy, the godly energy which exists in Torah. So a union from every side, a union, and it's again simultaneous to be embraced and being being embraced and embracing in the same time doesn't exist physically. In those, that's the greatest union which can ever exist between two separate objects. And in this case, when you're dealing with a Yid which is learning Torah, the fact that not only does Torah have the common denominator with mitzvahs, like mitzvahs, that the energy of God surrounds the person. More than that, the energy of God goes within the neshama. Within the neshama means the neshama, hence the neshama is surrounding the Torah. So that union just exists by Limdat Torah. And because it exists by Limdat Torah, Torah has a virtue even over learning the Kima mitzvahs. That's why one of the things Torah is called, Torah is called lechem, bread, and it's called V'seirascha. David HaMelech said a pasuk, V'seirascha b'seich meyai, literally means it goes within my within my intestines. And also Torah is called compared to bread, right? If you're very hungry, for example, and you're going to be a whole pantry full of bread, and you're going to jump into it, all of you is going to be in that bread, in that pantry, in that closet. All of you is going to be within the bread. You're going to become less hungry. Not at all. Bread you got to internalize. In order that the bread should have an effect, that it should break my hunger, it has to go inside, and it also has to dissolve within me, and it becomes ultimately my blood, and my mitzvahs, my very core and essence. In other words, the energy of life via the blood, or the blood ultimately becomes dam basar kibsari, becomes my flesh and blood, which ultimately gives me energy. So it has to go within. Torah is called lechem. Torah is called bread. Mitzvahs are called v'katzina rotzin tatzirenu. It surrounds the person. Torah is called lechem because it goes within the person, but it does both. It goes within and surrounds. So, the union is infinitely greater, because the fact that there's no limit to the union, that it comes in from all sides, that shows that the union, by definition, which exists by Limdat Torah, is infinitely greater. That's the reason why Talmud Torah can be cool. And what is Torah? It doesn't mean, and what is the godliness which exists within Torah? Not only the kind of the spirituality which we try to find maybe in a hint in Torah, for example, or Kabbalah, which we're going to look for the divine dimension and aspects of Torah. No, simply taking a Mishnah and opening up the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, the Alter Rebbe is going to use the Lashon again, we're just giving this preview to the Pedic, that Ruvain, the Mishnah says, that or the Gemara says, that Ruvain says like this, and Shimon says like this, comes the Torah, and the Gemara, the Mishnah, and dictates the Psak is so-and-so. In other words, the Halach is so-and-so. You learn about it. Who is dictating this Psak? Who is dictating this verdict? This is God Himself, dictating the version via the Mishnah, via the Gemara, and so on. So this is God, which is in that Mishnah, and He's dictating that Reuven, this is the Psak, this is the verdict. When you learn about that Mishnah, the energy of God, which is in that Mishnah, the essence of God, which is in that Mishnah, goes completely, fills you in, and in the same second, simultaneously surrounds you. You are completely sandwiched from the essence of God. And that again is the advantage of Torah over mitzvahs. So let's learn it inside. L'teisus bir bayit heitev. Additional explanation, and again, thoroughly to understand Lashon Tfisa. Shomer Liyo said less machshavit tfisa bach, that there's no thought could ever grasp you, Hashem. And how do we conclude the statement in the previous chapter, which we learned last week, that Ki'im, when could we grasp Hashem? When we learn Torah and we do mitzvahs, right? Less machshav v'tisabach without Torah. Without Torah, no one could ever say, I understand, I perceive God, or I grasp God. It does not exist. The only way we can grasp God, tfisa, means we can grasp God, is through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. So when we think about grasping the ideal, quintessential notion of grasping is in Torah, even more than mitzvahs. Why so? Every intellect is maskil is a muso when he understands and he perceives with the seichel. Any concept, the seichel takes a muskil mafkifel b'sichle. So the intellect grasps this insight and surrounds it with the sichle, with its seichel, with its intellect. And Vamuskol, right, is still dealing with one direction. Vamuskol, because my seichel grasps it, surrounds it, so consequently, Vamuskol nitfos, it is grasped by umukov, umulubosh, and encompassed, and umulubosh, and it's invested, enclosed within the seichel shisigiviskili, in the intellect which understood it and grasped it. It's still one direction, that it went into it. The seichel went into a seichel tefis muskal, rather the insight went into my seichel. I understood it, so it entered into my intellect. And here he comes the other direction, the other way of the union, that also my seichel, not only that it goes into the insight, goes into my intellect. There's a little tongue twister. Also, the intellect is invested in that insight in the time when you perceive it and you grasp it with your seichel. This is the other direction. And for example, when a man understands and perceives a halach, simple halach. Again, halachas are not simple because the essence of it, but in this context, it's halacha. He opens up a Shulchan Aruch, or he opens a Mishnah, and he learns halacha in the Mishnah, or in the Gemara. Not sure you have Buddha to understand it thoroughly, right? Because remember, we said this at a time, that learning is not to Tehillim. When you have to learn something, you want to be Mekayim, it's Talmud Torah, you ought to understand it in order to fulfill this mitzvah. You can't learn a Gemara, or someone's going to say, oh, the Gemara, God, I believe everything what it says over here, close the Gemara, that was my daf hayom for the day. I was saying the other day that I was speaking to a few guys, and they're part of this learning session. I think it wasn't. Yeah, it was. And we were speaking about this mitzvah. Talmud Torah, you have to understand. Lashuri Aburi, you have to understand what the Gemara says thoroughly. I'm telling you, 3 out of 5 would say, we don't understand everything. You're sure we're not Mekayim the mitzvah? Yes, I'm sure. It's lovely that you come and you sit, and Hashem appreciates a person who wakes up early and he finds his way to shul and he sits instead of sleeping, he sits around the Gemara, and this in itself is a great mitzvah. And a great appreciation of the heavens above. People come and sit and learn, but we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with the mitzvah solely focusing on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Learning Torah means you got to understand what you're learning. There's a kasha. What's the kasha? What's the answer? What's the halacha? What are we learning over here? So because we're dealing with thoroughly understanding them, and that's what we're kind of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, right? So getting back to what he's saying over here, that when a person learns this halacha in the Mishnah or Gemara, lashura aburia, which means understand it thoroughly, what's happening at that time? These two things are happening. One, sichle tevis and makifai, so his intellect grasps and encompasses this insight of the Mishnah or Gemara or the Halacha. Now what happens is as well that not only this seichel, your seichel encompasses, surrounds that Halacha, but your seichel entered into the Halacha as well. Now who's surrounding who? The Halacha surrounding your seichel. So in a simultaneous to your seichel surrounding the Halacha, so the Halacha is within you. More than that, you entered into halacha. Your seichel enters into halacha. Now, what is this halacha? And ba'isa shah, again, in the same time, simultaneous to again, you encompassing the halacha encompasses you. And what is this halacha? The halacha is chachmasir utzein shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the wisdom and the desire of the Holy One, blessed be He. This is God. The halacha is God, like we said, because Hashem anon nafshi k'savis yahavas. Hashem placed Himself in the Torah. She'olah b'tzein aroused in Hashem's desire. When we say it's desire of God, means that she'yitenu v'nkach, you open a Mishnah or open a Gemara, or a Sefer Halachos, and it says that if Reuven is going to say so and so, derech mashal is an example. V'shimon kach v'kach, and Shimon which is again standing in opposition to Reuven, who says, I say so and so. So yeah, psak b'neim kach v'kach, that the verdict is so and so. And Alter Rebbe says, interestingly, when it comes to learning Torah, this particular case which you're learning about never had to be, because we're not dealing with the dimension of mitzvahs, or that the perspective of the ma'aseh, the action, the mitzvah, which is something which we deal with in this physical place and time. For example, matzah we eat on Pesach. Sukkot, we sit in the sukkah. On Sukkot, mitzvahs are associated with time and place. They're in this realm, in this world. Torah is transcendent in the case also. Just we're talking about seichel, just to not move off much. But for example, someone learns the Gemara, takes the Gemara, Sukkah or Mishnah, Sukkah is the middle Chalamayit Pesach, and he learns. Is Mekayim the mitzvah of Talmud Torah? Absolutely. Right? And you take a Gemara Pesachim in the middle of Sukkot, and you learn the Mishnah about dealing with Pesach in the middle of Sukkot. You learn absolutely sure you fulfill the mitzvah, because Torah is transcendent the time and place. But here he's coming from a different angle, the same idea, but from a different angle. It says, this case which you're learning about, you open the Mishnah, and Reuven said so and so, Shimon so and so, and so Torah dictates, which is via the Mishnah, the Gemara, that the verdict is so and so. It not necessarily ever has to be. It never was. It never is. Rather, it's not something which you're dealing with right now, and it never will be. Irrelevant completely. Because here you're dealing with Torah. Here you're dealing, what does the Eibush have to say about this? This is God, the way the Eibush does in Torah. The Mishnah never has to unfold in our real life, and not only in my life, from Adam Rishon to the end of times, this particular Mishnah could be, it'll never unfold. It's because it's irrelevant. Even if this never was, never will be forever. They'll never come to court. They'll never and never present their cases in this manner, in this fashion, the way the Mishnah deals with it. Mikol Makim. Nonetheless, irrelevant to the fact that it'll never be. But mi'acha, right? We go to the next page. Because this is what aroused in Hashem's desire and Hashem's wisdom. Again, about the Holy One, blessed be He, of God, of Hashem. That if He's going to say so, and this one's going to say so, Yapsakach, Torah says that the verdict would be so and so. Harei, that when you learn it, you engage with that halacha, which means when you know and you perceive with your intellect this psak, like as halacha which is presented in the Mishnah or laid out, right, in the Mishnah or Gemara or in Poskim. At that time, what is happening in Masa is a masik v'tefes and makib b'sichlei. You are grasping, perceiving and grasping, surrounding with your intellect what is in your intellect, the desire and the wisdom of Hashem, because you surrounded that halacha, that insight, that halacha went into you. And what is it? And what is that halacha? What is it that on its own, less machshavet tfisabei, nobody, no thought on their own could ever grasp Hashem, and not only Hashem Himself, on its own, no thought without the Torah, without Hashem giving us nasan lanos Torah, without giving us the gift of connecting ourselves through Torah, never could any, the most brilliant mind can never grasp Hashem. And again, by definition, we are part of creation, created beings, and Hashem is the creator. It's impossible that any mind, even the most lofty, profound, and holy mind, could not grasp Hashem on his own. Not Hashem, not His wisdom, not His desire, which ultimately won, as we said quite a few times. The only way we can grasp Hashem is learn that halacha, to go on a mountaintop and start pondering and contemplating about this great God. You've not gotten close to one iota, because a mind, even the loftiest, most profound and deepest minds, cannot grasp God. Again, because He is the Creator. He is the infinite Creator. And we are finite beings, and even again, spiritual, celestial beings, but nonetheless, in comparison to Hashem, nothing could ultimately grasp Hashem. The only way we could connect to Hashem is where Hashem placed Himself. Again, that's why it's a matana, that's why it's a great gift to Torah, that other than that, we would never, ever have a connection to this God. And Hashem put Himself in the Torah mitzvahs. Again, the common denominator between Torah mitzvahs, that we both connect to God. But in this case, He's talking about the virtue of Torah, The only way, ki'im, the only way that we could be tofes, grasp God, is it's only when Hashem's wisdom and Hashem's desire are invested in these halachas which are presented to us. So at the same time that your intellect is surrounding this halacha, begam sichle melubish bahem, also simultaneous to the same time, your seichel in the same moment, in the same experience, to say it better, your intellect is invested in the halacha. The who, and when we read this, we understand that it's a yichud nifla, it's most wonderful unity, which doesn't exist, shein yichud kamayu, that there's no other union and unity which exists, and not only that, v'leike erki, nothing close, nimtza klal b'gashmis, that's something which we could, it's not found in this, in our physical reality. It doesn't exist. Or you're surrounding something, or something surrounds you. It cannot be in the same time. That it shall actually become united from every side and angle. It doesn't exist. Only where does it exist? Only within Torah. And that is the greatness of, we have this next over here, and that is the greatness of learning Torah. Bezais. Here, and it has two sides. Here. And it has two sides. Bezais Maila. And this is Maila Yisera Gdela V'Nifla Lein Kates. This is this great and awesome and wondrous virtue. And Lein Kates means infinitely greater virtue, which exists in mitzvahs Yediyas HaTorah V'Sagosa, in the mitzvah, in the command of knowing the Torah and grasping the Torah even more than kol mitzvahs maisius, more than all mitzvahs which are associated again with our action, and even mitzvahs atleis b'dibur, and even mitzvahs which are associated with speech. Now, why do we say even? Because everybody understands, or at least our mind understands, that a more refined type of relationship with God is something we do with our speech more with our action. Shaking a lulav and esrog, and then davening. It seems it is, at least by definition. Speech is much more a profound way of expression more than action. So the greatness here, we're not talking about learning Torah, the dimension of learning Torah with you. The idea of just knowing Torah. I know what that Rambam is saying. I know what that Mishnah is saying. I understand thoroughly what that Gemara is saying. That union does not exist even in mitzvahs, and not only in physical mitzvahs, which is mitzvahs again associated with the physical, which is like lulav and esrog, when someone is an example, which is a mitzvah done physically, but even a mitzvah which is done with speech, which is again more refined expression, what an edler expression that a person expresses his connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, like he benches or he davens and so on. Knowing Torah is even greater than that. And here the Alter Rebbe says more so. Even regarding the mitzvah of learning Torah by speech. Now, what do you mean? How could learning Torah be greater than learning Torah? He says learning Torah even greater than learning Torah, right? Even the mitzvah of oral Torah study. How does that work? The answer is, let's look at the words. Mitzvah Talmud Torah shebedibur. We know in Torah there's two dimensions. The perfect scene of it, the perfect scenario of fulfilling the mitzvah of learning Torah, he understands what the Mishnah says, he also verbalizes the words of Torah. The Gemara says, Chaim him l'mitzayim b'peh. That the one who, the Chaim, true life, one gains, the energy of life which he gains learning Torah is when he verbalizes with mouth. You go into Beis HaMedrash, you hear guys, Rabbi, it only exists really learning Torah. You walk in a library, any other study. You'll never hear people opening their books and saying, this professor said like this. You never see that kach chayis. Then you go to Beis HaMedrash, people are speaking, Omar Rabbi, Omar Rava, what's this all about? It really doesn't really exist across any intellectual pursuits and studies. It doesn't exist. You'll never walk into any study hall which is not associated with learning Torah, and you hear that voice, people speaking. Yeah, people talk with each other. What this George, this they're saying, that's it. But this saying with such vigor and such energy and such vitality in learning. The answer is, why is it like that? Because in mitzvahs, learning Torah, there's a mitzvah to verbalize the words of Torah. There's a mitzvah to verbalize the words of Torah. So you can't still open up a Gemara and say, I'm going to buy a Marav, I don't understand what I'm saying. So you're saying Tehillim very loud. No, that's not the mitzvah of Limud Torah. First and foremost, you got to understand what you're saying. As we said, this is Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah is Limud Torah, you got to understand. In the same token, there's a mitzvah of not only understanding but verbalizing the words of the Torah as well. Chaim heim metzayim epet, to say the words. So Amar Abaya, Amar Rava, the right way is to say and to say it again, or to say it every word clear and then explain something. People explain themselves also, even without a chavrusa, and they say it to themselves. Abaya asks, and Abaya, and then Rava answers, and so on. That's the mitzvah of Limud Torah. So what we do see over here, what the person is exercising at that moment when he learns Torah, the perfect way Torah wants a yid to learn Torah, in two ways, or there's two dimensions of his learning. One dimension is that he's understanding what he's learning, and the other thing is he's verbalizing these words of Torah. So Dr. Rebbe is saying over here is the knowledge, the understanding of the Torah is greater not only than shaking a little of an esrog, and not only than using your speech, again your relationship with God like davening or saying a bracha, but even greater than the dimension or the expressing and verbally expressing the words of Torah dimension which exists in Torah itself. In other words, if you want to break up the two, the fact that I know what I'm learning, the idea, the knowledge in what I'm learning, and the other dimension of the same exact mitzvah of verbally uttering the words of the Torah that I'm learning, which one of the two is a greater union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The fact that I understand. Because the fact that I'm saying the words, that's kind of the mitzvah dimension of Torah. The fact that I understand, that's the Limud Torah, the Talmud Torah dimension of the learning. Is it clear? The mitzvah, in Torah itself, there's two dimensions. There's two dynamics in Torah. Understanding what I'm learning, and then there's the mitzvah of learning. How do you do the mitzvah of learning Torah? Not only understand, say the words loud. That's the mitzvah. But because we're saying the whole time over here that the learning dynamic or learning Limud Torah is so much greater than all mitzvahs, not only greater than shaking a little of an esrog, greater than the mitzvah dimension which exists in Torah itself. Greater than verbalizing the words of Torah. That's what he says. Mitzvah, afilu mitzvahs Talmud Torah should be dibur. All through all the mitzvahs which are associated with speech or ma'aseh with actions, HaKadosh Baruch Hu malbishas hanefesh. Hashem surrounds. Remember, it's only a one-way union, one-way unity. That then Hashem malbishas hanefesh, like we learned last week, Hashem encompasses the soul. Umakifa Hashem, and the light of Hashem surrounds it from head to toe. We said last week, Kutsuri Echsabai. Katsina Ratzon Tater, and it completely surrounds the neshama. But the b'diyas HaTorah, milvad she'aseichel melubish b'chochmas Hashem, additional to the seichel, my intellect is invested in Hashem's wisdom, which again, that is the common denominator which exists with all mitzvahs. If my intellect is in Hashem's wisdom, so hence Hashem's wisdom is surrounding me. But here we have the other virtue which exists in Torah. Inigam chochmas Hashem b'kirbei. Also the wisdom of Hashem is within me. So I am surrounding that chochmas Hashem. It's a double-way unity that only exists in Torah. Have a great evening.